A very good and happy morning, my dear children. It feels great to get connected with all of you. Today I am going to do class 6 English literature, the very fascinating story of Daedalus and Icarus. It's a Greek myth, but before we go on to the story, let's look at the learning objectives, the things that you will understand, the things that you will know once this lesson is done. So what are the learning objectives? You will understand the concept of myth, you will be able to evaluate the story of Daedalus and Icarus, and you will also understand the importance of obedience. Now children, we have all read the stories of say Hercules and his 12 labors, or the story of King Minos and his golden touch, or last year you did Minotaur and King Minos. Now what are these? There is a special name for all these stories. These stories are known as myths. Now what are myths? We often say Greek myths, for that matter we have lot of Indian myths, stories from Indian mythology, Persian myths, Roman myths, Egyptian myths. So what are myths? These are the stories which have been retold since ancient times, right? These are the stories which have come down to us from generation, which have been passed down from one generation to another, right? So what are the things that are very important in myths? These are traditional stories, and these stories will definitely have an interplay of gods, superheroes, people with extraordinary powers. And they also teach us some morals. There is always some sort of moral attached to these stories, right? Now in myths also, there are different kinds. Myths can be divided into different kinds. For example, we have got religious myths. Now what are those religious myths? Religious myths are the stories where we have gods playing a role, with the stories of how the world began, of the time since from the beginning of the world, how everything fell into place. So these are the stories which have based on popular rituals. These are the religious myths. Next we have historical myths. Historical myths. In historical myths, we have stories about wars, warfares, we have stories of rise and fall of empires, we have stories like the Trojan War, where something is historical, maybe some characters or the place which have historical evidence, but everything is not based on facts. There is a lot of fiction as well. So these are known as historical myths. And we have a third one here, which are known as hero myths, or myths which are based on superheroes, people with extraordinary powers, characters like Hercules, Achilles, who have skills, who have powers which are beyond normal human beings. So these are the basic three kinds of myths: religious, historical and hero myths, right? Now let's go on to the main idea of our lesson. Today's lesson Daedalus and Icarus. Once we do the lesson, you will understand that the main story, the main moral of the story is obedience. That is the crux of the story. Now in our day-to-day life, when we talk about obedience, what do we refer to? Say for example, obedience to parents, right? First and foremost, for example, when they tell us to eat healthy and we are not really willing to eat healthy and we want junk food, so we should obey them, right? Because what they are saying is for our good, so that we have a healthy lifestyle. Many a times they tell us to do daily chores around the house. We think, oh, why should we do it? But then those are important. Why? Because they make us feel responsible, so that we can contribute in our own way to our family. Then we can be obedient to our grandparents, people who are elderly. We can pay our respects, we can share things with them, we can listen to their experiences so that we can learn a lot of things from them, because they have a whole lot of experience with them. We can learn many things from our grandparents. So it's very important that you are obedient to them as well. Next comes, very important, teachers, right? Teachers are always telling you, be obedient, be obedient. So when can you be obedient? For example, teacher has given you some homework and you are asked to submit it on time. So you can be obedient and you can do your work neatly, submit the work on time. When the teacher asks you to maintain discipline in the class, that's another example of being obedient. Or when the teacher asks you to keep the class neat and clean and litter free, that's also an example of being obedience when you listen to the teacher. And there's one more kind which comes to my mind, is the law of the land. You know, a lot of rules are laid for us so that everything runs smoothly in the country, in the society. For example, when you follow the traffic signals, right? That's also you are being obedient. You are obeying the traffic signals, you are obeying the law of the land, you are obeying, you are following the rules. Also, say for example, paying taxes. Of course, you don't pay taxes, but your parents do. That also again is following the rules, obeying the rules. So these are the various ways in which we can be obedient in our day-to-day life. Now let's see how this thing plays a role in our story of Daedalus and Icarus. Now this story has the main characters. The main characters in this story are we have Daedalus. Now children, Daedalus can be spelled as D-U-L-U-S. It can also be spelled as D-A-L-U-S. Both are correct. Both are acceptable. Right? So we have the main character of Daedalus here. We have King Minos and we have Daedalus' son Icarus. So these are the three main characters of our story. Now before we begin the story, let me just give you a brief background as to how the story begins, how we come to this part of our story. Now Daedalus, he is a very skilled and intelligent craftsman and he is highly respected by the people. He is very popular. Why? Because he has invented lot of things, he has discovered lot of things, he has made lot of things which have been very useful for people, which have made the lives of the people very easy. So people love him like anything. Then we have King Minos. He is the ruler of Crete. Crete is an island and he is the ruler there. And Icarus is Daedalus' young son. Now the story begins that Daedalus is a very skilled craftsman, but somehow he commits a crime of envy. He was envious of someone and he committed a crime. Now because of which he has to be given a punishment. So what they do is they send him into an exile and he sent to the land of Crete where King Minos ruled. And he is made a subject of King Minos. So Daedalus lived there for quite some time, for many years, and there he had his son Icarus. Now this is where our story begins from. Now what kind of a ruler is King Minos? It is said that he was a wise person, he was a just ruler, he was firm but fair. So he was wise. If we can describe his characteristics as to what sort of a person he was, or what sort of a ruler he was. We can say he was wise, he was just, he was firm but fair, and he was admired by everybody. All the Greeks looked up to him, they admired him, they liked him a lot. They said there was nowhere would you find a king like King Minos, because he was so fair. Now all this admiration, you can say, went to his head, and he became quite proud. He began to feel that he is the wisest of all and there is no one in the world who is better than him, which is not a good thing. You know, we should never be too proud of ourselves. So one day he comes to know about this person in his kingdom whose name is Daedalus, right? And he calls Daedalus. He is quite interested to meet him because he has heard so many things about Daedalus. So he really wants to meet this person and find out who is he and why is he so popular. So he calls Daedalus and he asks him that can you build a labyrinth for me? What is a labyrinth? Now we have done this in class 5. I'm sure you have, when we are doing the story of Minotaur, you have come across this word labyrinth. A labyrinth is a maze, a complex maze where there are many rooms which are interconnected by passages, and it's very difficult to come out of a labyrinth. Now Daedalus was asked by King Minos to make a labyrinth from which no person would be able to come out. That was one condition. Daedalus of course agreed, and King Minos in the meantime also found out that the reason for his popularity was that Daedalus had invented many things like the potter's wheel, which had made the work of the potters very easy. You know, now they had a wheel, they could just take a clump, a bit of clay and just put it in the middle of the wheel and spin it around and then give shape to that clay so that various things, vases and all could be formed. So their work became very easy and they were grateful to for that. Daedalus also invented saw, through which using which large trees could be cut easily. Also the sailors were very grateful to him because he taught them how to rig the sails. Have you come across this word? Rig the sails? Rigging the sail means to tie the sail tightly using cables and wires in such a way so that the ship can move easily. That made the work of the sailors very easy, so they could now venture out into the sea and explore various places easily. They didn't have any trouble in sailing. So they were also thankful to Daedalus for teaching them how to rig the sails. Now these were the ways through which he had become, the things because of which he had become very popular. Now when King Minos gave him the responsibility, Daedalus and his son Icarus was also skillful. Both of them started to make the design of the labyrinth. They spent a lot of time, months went by, they designed it, then they started building it, and finally when the labyrinth was built, it was the greatest maze in the world. Nobody had ever seen anything like that. And Daedalus of course was very happy. He thought that he had done something really good. The king is sure to be very happy with his work. So he went to the king, and the king, what do you think? What would have been the king's reaction? What should he have done? Do you think the king should have rewarded Daedalus for his work because he had excelled himself? He had done something which surpassed the expectation of the king. So do you think the king was happy? Shouldn't he be happy? But no, the king was not happy. Now, what could be the possible reason for that? The reason being, jealousy. The king felt that this person, he's so popular and he is so skillful, what if he becomes more popular than him? And what if he stakes a claim to the throne? What would happen then? So he was not really happy with Daedalus, and despite Daedalus doing his work so well, he was sent into imprisonment. And was he sent alone there? No. He was sent there with his son Icarus. So both of them were shut up in a tower. They were shut up in a tower. And this tower was heavily guarded. There were guards all around. They could never come out of the tower. All the ships passing by were carefully watched and observed so that nobody could help Daedalus and Icarus. Now, when Daedalus went to that tower, he looked out of the window and he felt so sad and so depressed because he thought that this was the end of his life. Maybe he could never be a free man again. He had lost his freedom forever. So he was very sad. But Icarus, being the small child that he was, and young people, they are always very hopeful. So he looked out of the window one day and he told his father that, "Father, we cannot move out from this tower through land or by sea. But what if we could fly? What if we could fly like those seagulls, like those birds, and just, move to freedom, get a flight of freedom for us? Is that possible?" Daedalus didn't say anything, but he realized that it was definitely a great idea. What Icarus said was definitely a great idea. Daedalus then, after that, made a plan, and he told Icarus that let's go down to the beach, and near the beach there was a nesting place of these gulls where there were plenty of feathers. So let us collect the feathers of all sizes, the delicate ones, small delicate ones, the long feathers, and bring them to the tower. Icarus did as he was instructed. Both the father and son, daily they went down and collected feathers and brought them to the tower. And after they had a sizable amount of feathers with them, Daedalus then started to work. And what was he doing? He was trying to make wings. He was trying to make wings so that they could fly out of that tower. But is it possible to make wings with no tools? Because he hardly had anything with him. Everything was taken away. But he, being a very skillful innovator, what did he do? He had a needle with him in his tunic. The Greeks, they used to wear tunics, long dresses tied at the waist. So he carried a needle in his tunic. He took out the tunic and threads. Where would he get threads there? In the tower. So he thought that why not let me take out the old threads from a blanket. They were given a blanket, and from that old blanket he took out the threads. And now he needed glue. What would he use for glue? Well, he could use wax of an old candle. So with all these things, he started his work of making the wings. And he worked day in and day out. And after some time, finally, Daedalus was ready with the wings. 4 enormous wings. He was finally ready with the 4 enormous wings. But he realized that these wings were not naturally given to them by God. For birds, wings were a natural thing. Why? Because God has given them these wings. But for them, these wings were created by mortals, by human beings. So he understood that he needed a whole lot of practice so that they could fly easily. So Daedalus started to practice with the wings on. He fastened the wings and he flapped his wings, and to his delight, he could fly like a bird, and he went round and round the tower, he circled the tower. And after that, Icarus followed him, and Icarus also could fly the way Daedalus did. So they kept on practicing day in and day out, and finally the day arrived when Daedalus decided that now was the time for them to leave. And when the day dawned, it was a beautiful sunny morning, they decided to leave the tower. And Daedalus, as he was fastening the wings, as he was fastening Icarus's wings, he had a sense of, what is the word, have you come across the word premonition? Yes, he had this feeling that something unpleasant was about to happen. He could not explain it, but he had that feeling that maybe something was not going to go right, not going to go the way it should be. So he had tears in his eyes, and he looked at his son lovingly for one last time. He had a feeling that something probably was not going to be right. So he told him, Icarus, listen to me carefully, and he gave him 2 warnings, very important warnings. Rather, you can say parental advice. He told him not to fly too close to the sea, or not to fly too low. And second one, not to fly too high. Now, why did he say that Icarus should not fly too low? He said that Icarus, if you fly too low, the mists of the sea would clog your wings. They would make your wings very heavy, and you would find it difficult to fly. And he told him not to fly too high. Why? Because his wings the feathers were glued using the wax, and if he flew too high near the sun's heat would melt the wax and the feathers would come off, and finally Icarus won't be able to fly. So he said, keep these words in mind, because you will live by my word or you will die by my word. If you keep my words in your mind, you will live. If you forget my words, that might be the end of Icarus. So Icarus said, Father, I'll keep your words in mind, I'll obey you, I'll listen to what you tell me, I'll keep those words in mind. So Daedalus, he went to the edge of the roof and he took the flight of freedom, and then after he had flown some distance, he just turned to look, just as a mother bird turns to look and see whether the fledgling is following the mother bird properly or not. Same way, Daedalus turned and saw that Icarus was following him nicely, and he was following the same path of Daedalus. So Daedalus was happy. Now all the tension, all the worries that he had were gone, and he started to enjoy his flight. He looked down and saw the blue sea. He looked down at the lush green farmland, and he saw that people were looking up at them, the farmers working in the field. They were looking at them and they were saying, see, God Apollo is flying. Apollo is the god of sun. God Apollo is flying and Cupid is following Apollo. Because they had never seen any human beings fly across the sky. So they thought surely those are gods. And Daedalus was enjoying all this, and he chuckled to himself and he thought, now King Minos can do nothing to me. He had imprisoned me. Despite my doing such a wonderful work, despite creating a labyrinth the way he had wanted and even surpassing what he had wanted, still he did not appreciate my work, rather he imprisoned me. Now he can do nothing to me, right? Saying that, he just started flying happily. But then he just turned around to say something to Icarus, and he saw that Icarus was nowhere in sight. And as he looked here and there, he saw that Icarus had actually flown too high in the sky. So Daedalus now realized that what was about to happen, all his worst fears were about to come true. So he called after him, he called him, Icarus, come back, Icarus, don't fly so high. But Icarus was already so high up in the sky that he could not hear that his father was calling him, and he was enjoying his flight. He wanted to fly high and high up. As Daedalus watched, small plumes began to drop from the wings of Icarus. Plumes, feathers, and float in the air. Soon larger feathers fluttered and became detached and floated gently down, down, down. Icarus flapped more vigorously and began to kick his feet in panic, but it was to no avail. The boy plummeted towards the sea like a dying comet, and he was enveloped by the blue waters below. All that remained were some feathers floating on the gentle waves. A very sad ending, isn't it? So Icarus dies, he is drowned in the sea. And how does he fall towards the sea? He is plummeted towards the sea. Plummeted, there's a sharp fall, when you fall, drop sharply towards the sea like a dying comet. You know, comets are icy things which when they circle sun, when they move around the sun, they start to melt, and we say that the comet is dying, and there's a tail to that comet. So when Icarus fell down from the sky and into the sea, it just seemed like a dying comet was going into the water. There's a comparison between a dying comet and the way Icarus was falling down from the sky, and that was the end of Icarus. Now, why do you think Icarus died? Icarus dies because he disobeys his father, because he did not listen to what his father had said. He did not listen to these two things. He told him not to fly too low, not to fly too high. But Icarus, in his excitement, forgot this, and he flew too high near the sky, near the sun, and he died. The wings came off, the feathers came off, and finally he could not flap the wings, and he just fell into the sea and was drowned. Right? So that's the story of Daedalus and Icarus. I hope you enjoyed the story, but I've got something more for you. Some extension activity for you to do. This you will do in your rough work, children, in your rough notebook. You can just take a rough notebook and first you will take the book and read through the chapter silently. You will mark all the words which are difficult for you to understand or the words which are unfamiliar, and you can make something like this. This is known as a vocabulary notebook. You can write the words which are unfamiliar. Then you can make a column where you can write inferred meaning. What do I mean by this? Inferred meaning is the meaning that you will try to guess after reading the chapter. from the context. You will not open the dictionary. You will try to guess the meaning of the word after reading the text. Okay? And once you are done with that, then you will check the dictionary meaning. Then you can tally and see whether your meaning matches with the dictionary meaning, how close is it to the dictionary meaning of that word. Now this is the way to find the meanings of words with which you are unfamiliar with, because it's not possible to know the meanings of all the words. So always do this, children. This is very helpful. You can have a vocabulary notebook at home and you can make a grid like this and write the unfamiliar words, inferred meaning and dictionary meaning. So once you are done with the silent reading and you have found out the meanings of difficult words, what you can do is you can find and read another story with a similar moral, and you can also create a play or write a story based on the moral of Daedalus, and you can also draw pictures related to the story. These are some of the extension activities which you can do after you are done with the reading of the lesson. After you have understood everything, after you have understood the moral of the story, you can find and read another story with a similar moral. You can create a play, write your own story based on the same moral, and you can also draw pictures related to the story. But all of this you will do in your rough notebook, right? This is just for your homework which you will do after reading the story. These are extension activities not to be done in your classwork notebook, just your rough notebook. Fine. And before I finish, once more let me reiterate the moral of the story be obedience. Listen to what your parents say, listen to what the elders say, never forget their advice. And also we have another theme here of jealousy. It's the jealousy of King Minos which made him imprison Daedalus, though Daedalus did such wonderful work and he became too proud of himself. So we should never become too proud of ourselves. We should not be jealous of the other person. We should never envy other person if somebody has done something which is better than us. In fact, we should appreciate that person and admire that person, and we should always be obedient and listen to what our parents say, because it's for our own good. So these are the few things which you'll keep in mind. The morals that we learned in this lesson, that we should always be obedient, follow what our parents, our elders tell us, and we should never be jealous and not to be too proud of ourselves, right? Thank you so much, children. I hope you enjoyed this story. Have a good time.